Jonathan Price, and welcome to another Tech Thursday. We are going to dive into orchestration. We're going to start a orchestration series, and it's going to the first couple of videos are going to be super very watered down in relation to what you can do with orchestration. And so we're going to cover basically the four groups in orchestration of voicing. So we're going to cover woodwinds, brass, percussion, and strings, and in that particular order. And these videos are gonna be pretty short in relation to a lot of the other videos that we've done. And I'm basically gonna talk about the instruments, the ranges, their transposition, what they sound like. If for some reason you've never heard of some of these instruments in the basic orchestral setting. And so let's dive in. So when we talk about orchestration, there's a few things that we need to understand. First off is that, yes, we have four groups of instruments. We have our woodwinds, brass, percussion, and strings. And in each of those categories, you have subcategories of voicing. So you have soprano, alto, tenor, and bass voices. And when I mean voices, I don't mean like actual singing voices. I mean, if you were to score this out choral style, you would have the soprano on the top, the top note. You would have the alto in the second, in the harmony position in the treble clef. You'd have the tenor voice, which is the top note typically in a bass clef, and you have the bass, which is the bottom note in the bass clef. And so what that looks like is, if I were to play, so you won't be able to hear anything just yet. So if I had a C as my bass note, the G would be the tenor, the D or the E would be the alto, and the C up here would be the soprano. And right now it's set on Piccolo, so you're not going to hear a chord. So that's basic voicings. Okay. So with that in mind, we're going to dive into the woodwinds this first time. And when I'm covering woodwinds, I'm only going to be covering the orchestral side of woodwinds. So what woodwinds you would actually find in a very typical orchestra. Now there will be exceptions to this. Namely, clarinets, they have a couple of different ones. You're also going to have a couple of different flutes. And that's about it. Saxophones, they're pretty standard throughout, and you'll find those. You won't really find those in an orchestral setting, more of a band setting. So, all right, the piccolo. The piccolo has a very bright and wonderful timbre that can be very, very piercing. And if you give a piccolo player the opportunity to play such, they will overpower your orchestra. And it's not necessarily due to the player. It's just that piccolo is so bright and so loud that it can really pierce through an orchestra, and it can be heard over everybody. It's mainly used to overdub or to play with the melody in a lot of cases. So it'll play with violins, French horns, trumpets, glockenspiel, celeste, piano, flutes, obviously, things like that. A piccolo, along with the flute, will also play runs and scales and arpeggios and little ornamental things for different pieces of music. So, written, this is something to keep in mind. So, for those of you who are actually writing music for orchestras and who are having your music performed, I'm going to go over some of the things that you need to think about when you're translating from your MIDI mockups to your orchestral sessions, or even vice versa. So when you're writing out parts, it's really, really important to make sure that, one, you're writing in their correct range. Sometimes samples will allow you to go up and down all over the keyboard in a range that is not actually possible for that particular instrument. So for instance, like I'm using Berlin Woodwinds, and they did a fantastic job at sampling their actual playing range and the sounding range. So when they have it shown in Contact, it'll actually show their sounding range instead of their playable range, because for the piccolo, even though it's written from D up to I think C, to the C7, it's actually sounding from the D up to C8. So that's D5 up to C8. So that's a pretty big discrepancy. Now, it is in concert pitch, so you don't need to worry about transposing, so that's awesome. The second thing that you need to worry about is dynamically controlling that instrument. So a piccolo, now this is a huge thing that samples haven't really done yet, and I wish that they would. Whenever you have, let's say you have an instrument that the piccolo can play pretty soft down here on a G. Okay, that's right in the meat range. Okay, when you get up to, they really have to start blowing really hard to get up that high, and even up to here, and then they're going to be blowing their faces off if they are playing this. Okay, they have to put a lot of air through that reed and through that opening, and to get a lot of air to circulate through that pipe so that that tone comes out and comes through. So you can't, when you're writing in your orchestral mock-ups, you can't start soft down here and then that at a dynamic level is not possible to play. You'll have a whole bunch of screeching and hissing, and that you will not have a good tone. If you try anything under a forte up here, it's not going to come through, and the player's just going to get frustrated, and he's going to be like, nope, can't do this. Okay, so keep that in mind. Those are the two things: dynamic control and range control. So make sure you're writing in the proper range. Now, writing for all these ranges is it can be either complicated or easy depending on what you want to make it. The best way to make sure that your instrument sounds good is to keep it in the clef plus or minus either a major second or a minor third, depending on the instrument. And we'll talk about that in future videos. But for right now, try to keep it within the staff. So from, like, for the flute, this alto flute is a perfect example. We go from inside the clef right here to a third below, and this is up to a fourth out of it, sorry, because I'm counting the G. Okay. Moving on. So that was the piccolo. The flute is the sister to the piccolo. It plays exactly the same kind of stuff that the piccolo will, except it has a range that is a octave lower. So it will sound in concert pitch. So a C on the piano is a C on the flute is a C forever. Amen. There you go. So it's one of those very easy, those instruments that's very easy to write for, so you don't have to worry too much about that one. The flute it can be nice and bright, and it creates nice warm textures. So here's kind of what a flute will sound like. So that's a little bit of a flute. So one thing that you may that you might encounter sometimes is you'll have a flute that will have a it's called a bass foot or a foot. Anyway, there'll be an extension on it that will allow the flute to play down to a B and sometimes even a B flat. And the only thing that is for is two things. If they need to play those notes and to make the C sound better, because once you play this C down here, now it's a little processed, but you can kind of tell that playing a C down there is a little difficult for a flute. It's at the very bottom register, and so they have to open their embouchure of their embouchure enough to be able to control that air and to keep that pressure where it needs to be to control that. So keep that in mind for the flute. All right, moving on. The oboe. Oboe is a B flat instrument. A lot of these instruments are pretty limited to their range specifically. Other instruments like violin and brass are huge for this. Brass players, there will be a suggested range, and there will be brass players who can play well above an octave below the highest note that a range chart will give you. Like trumpets, for instance, there are some trumpet players that can play like Miles Davis and oh my goodness, Louis Armstrong and Wynton Marsalis, and insert trumpet player here, and they can play either a fifth higher than the highest note that is put on a chart, or they can play up to an octave, or that is one of those that's based on the player's ability, not necessarily the limitation of the instrument. So that's one thing that's going to differentiate a lot of the woodwinds from the brass, and the brass from the strings as well. So the oboe is a double reed instrument, and the reed goes in the mouth. And you'll find that with double reed instruments, the musicians really like to have their reeds custom made, and they make the reeds themselves because they go out. They can go out pretty quick, so that you'll have if you've never seen a reed player, they'll have a cup of water and they'll have 6 or 7 different reeds in there depending on the piece. So if they're going to be playing for a really long time, you're going to see them switch out reeds, sometimes in the middle of a piece, sometimes at the beginning of a new movement, and it's really interesting to watch. If you ever have the opportunity to go and sit in on an orchestra session, or you have the ability to go to a rehearsal, ask if you can sit next to some of the players and just watch what they do and how they maintain their instrument. That is one of the best ways to learn the basics of orchestration. Okay, so the oboe is a B flat instrument, starts on a B flat and goes up to, let's see, I think, is that a C? A C, a G. Yeah, a B flat, sorry. Doink. The oboe is a gorgeous woody type instrument. It's kind of piercing. It's kind of Middle Eastern sounding, but not so nasally and pinched. So here's kind of what the oboe sounds like, and you can have this really nice, rich, and warm sound. Okay, so a nice, that warm tone. It can get a little pinch when it gets up here. So it's really good to make sure that if you're writing oboes up in that range, that you pair it with a flute or a piccolo. That way that it'll round out the sound instead of focusing it too much. And that's you gotta keep practicing, and you gotta keep messing around with these tones and these and how one timbre of an instrument shapes the other. It's really interesting. So experiment with that. Moving on. Clarinets. Clarinets are also a B flat instrument unless it is a stated key. So like E flat would be an E flat clarinet. Clarinet and A would be in the key of A in concert pitch. So concert C would be A for clarinet. Clarinets, they have this all woodwinds are really, really good at this. Outside of strings, for being able to bend a particular pitch. Brass can do it. Trombones can do it a lot because they have a slide. But trumpets, French horns, tubas, any sort of valved instruments can't really bend pitch as well as woodwinds can. Woodwinds, because they have a reed, they can bend these pitches really high, up to an octave, I think, maybe, and even some higher. And down. I think I had a professor who could bend down a pitch a fifth or a sixth, which was really cool. And so you had an entire octave and a half on one fingered note, and they could go up and down with ease. And he played an entire song in one octave, and he didn't even change his fingering. He just bent the notes up and down. He was awesome. Anyway, so like if you listen to the opening passage from Rhapsody in Blue by Gershwin, that clarinet opening is probably one of the most famous clarinet lines you will ever hear in your entire life. And that's it's been a long time since I played it, so sorry for, and this is the right patch. So anyway, I'm not going to try to play that because it's been a long day. So the clarinet. Okay, so it has it's kind of a combination between the flute and the oboe in terms of timbre. A little bit more woody. It can darker. Obviously go lower than the oboe, so it's really good for those inner voices, those tenor voices, the alto voices, things like that. It's really good at doing rhythms. The one thing that the clarinet is really, really hard to do, and so is to play vibrato. So if you're playing this really nice line and you want a lot of vibrato, don't ask a clarinet to play it because they have a really hard time controlling the vibrato. You can get it. It just doesn't sound totally natural. So keep that in mind when you're writing for clarinet. Let's see here. Anything else I want to say about the clarinet? Not really. The clarinet can also do a lot of runs and stuff. Pair it with the flute and the oboe if you're going to do runs. They work really, really well together. All right. Bassoon. Now, a lot of you guys have heard the bassoon, and it's one of the most Mickey Mouse made it absolutely famous. Oh, there it goes. That's the contrabassoon. Sorry, I'm thinking of the contrabassoon. I'll get there later. The bassoon is another one of those double reed instruments that has that will cover basically what the cello range covers. So from this low A down to or up to this tenor clef G. Make sure that's right. Can I see that right? Yeah. C, E, yeah, F. So that's the contrabassoon. Sorry, up to still F. Okay. The let's see. The ability for the bassoon can be very athletic. I've seen bassoon players be able to play crazy arpeggios that I had no idea that a bassoon player could play. I think when I used to write, I used to get into this habit of giving them just whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, nothing really complicated. Then I started studying Williams scores, and he puts those bassoons all over the place. They're playing these 16th runs and arpeggios like nobody's business. And they can do that. And once I realized that, it just opened my world completely to what was possible. So that was really, really cool. Now the contrabassoon does. Let me play a little bit. Sorry, of the bassoon for you. Okay, so it has a pretty nice range. Again, make sure that when you're writing the dynamics that you actually write the dynamics for what they're going to be playing in terms of their range. Don't put them in the basement of dynamic layers. So like, don't make them try to play piano or pianissimo when they're playing up really, really high. It's just going to sound horrible. They're going to start honking like a goose, and it's going to be awful. You're going to get so frustrated, and then you're going to look like a fool because you tried to write that. So just saving you from that. All right, contrabassoon plays everything an octave lower than the bassoon. Still in concert pitch, which is really nice. And let's see. Contrabassoon was made famous by, again, Mickey Mouse. You had... Whoop. I know that's the mountain. Ride of the Valkyries. What's the Mickey Mouse one I'm thinking of? I'm going to stop this video, and I'm immediately going to remember what it was. Shoot. Anyway, so the contrabassoon is going to play a lot of the stuff that the bass is going to play, and a lot of the stuff that the cello is going to play. It's going to bring out and enhance what the contrabass is going to be playing. And so that is a really good opportunity to make sure that you're, boy, I did this one time where I wrote my bass part out, and then I went to put it up in the contrabassoon, and for whatever reason, I transposed it, thinking that it was a transposing instrument, and ended up a second off. And I was listening through, and it just sounded awful. And I was like, what in the world is going on? And so I was soloing all these instruments, trying to figure out where it was. I knew it was in the lower register. And I finally got to the bassoon and the bass. And when I realized that they were a second apart, I was like, oh my goodness, how stupid am I? So that's a good opportunity to make sure that your pitches are the same. Okay, so it has a really nice sound to it. It's a lot warmer. It can be a little honky if it gets away from newer players. So keep that in mind if you're writing music for newer instrumentalists. That is one thing that they can do with these double reeds. So that is a overarching, very general, very basic view of orchestrating for Woodwinds. Now next week I'm going to take a woodwind piece, and I'm going to do a MIDI mock-up of a popular woodwind piece, or take a section out of a popular woodwind piece, and we're going to look at how to make those woodwinds sound as natural and as real as possible, knowing the information that we have. So look forward to that. Also, one final thing. Vic, Jenny, and myself are in the works of putting together something really, really special for you guys. Now, I can't say exactly what it is, but I wanted you guys to make sure that you're watching these videos and you are paying attention to these posts, because in the next either day or up to 3 days, I think, we're waiting for confirmation, and we're going to do an interview, and we can't tell you who it is yet, but it's going to be awesome, and we're all really excited about this. So watch for those posts, and yeah, it's just gonna be great. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment in the comment section, as well as if you have any tips or tricks for future shows, or if you would like to suggest a topic for a show, that will be awesome. Next week, I will also be showing off one of my tech little gadgets that I really enjoy using. And hopefully I'll be able to. I don't have a camera, so I won't be able to show you physically, but I'll pull it up online and show you guys what it can do. So, with that being said, I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I look forward to talking with you guys later. Have a wonderful night and a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. See ya.